while his pregnant wife cried at home. The Millionaire posted vacation. Pics with his mistress. Then came the audit. They say that beneath every polished photograph lies a truth we dare not expose. Meet Mark Rutherford, a millionaire who appeared to have it all, a sprawling empire, gleaming sports cars and high society connections from New York to Monaco. His social media profiles flaunted sun-kissed getaways with an alluring woman at his side, but the world didn't know the tears he left behind. At home, Mark's pregnant wife, Angela, anxiously awaited his return, watching in despair as he posted glamorous vacation photos with his secret mistress. Little did he realize that a brutal audit loomed on the horizon, poised to shatter his perfect facade. At first glance, the life of Mark Rutherford looked like a fairy tale. Hailing from a modest neighborhood in upstate New York, Mark had ascended the social and financial ladder at breathtaking speed. He had rebranded himself into a savvy businessman who moved effortlessly in circles filled with CEOs, philanthropists and venture capitalists from Manhattan. Guests at his lavish parties would whisper about Mark's meteoric rise, debating whether his success was the product of ruthless cunning, uncanny luck, or possibly both. His wife, Angela Rutherford, had grown up in an entirely different environment, sunlit farmland just outside Buffalo, A. Kind and gentle soul. Angela had fallen for Mark's charm when they were young. In those early years, he possessed a rare combination of drive and tenderness. She could still recall the day he proposed an intimate picnic near a serene lake where he vowed to cherish her forever. Although the lake was hardly a glamorous setting, the genuine emotion in Mark's eyes made every breeze and sunbeam feel like divine blessings upon their union. Their first few years of marriage were marked by humble dreams and long conversations about building a stable future. Angela had a warm smile and an unyielding belief in Mark's potential. She supported him when he launched his first company, a small tech startup, funded by meager savings and the generosity of a few distant relatives. She listened patiently to his late-night brainstorming sessions and scribbled business plans on napkins. She believed wholeheartedly in the man who had once promised her that no matter how high he soared, he would never leave her side. But success, as it often does, transformed Mark. The better the company did, the more Mark's life became a whirlwind of red carpet galas, midnight phone calls with overseas clients, and secretive deals that always seemed to happen behind closed doors. Angela initially chalked it up to the demands of business. He was forging connections, building a network, ensuring they would never again fret about money. But as Mark's taste for luxury intensified, so did the gap between them. No longer content with a quiet dinner at home, he began to crave expensive restaurants, dinners with powerful executives, and weekends aboard yachts docked in exclusive marinas. During this swift transition from middle-class comfort to extravagant wealth, Angela sometimes felt like a relic of Mark's past. She struggled to navigate the new social circles he so eagerly embraced. It wasn't that Angela lacked sophistication, she simply had a different set of values. Surrounded by glitzy soirees and endless champagne flutes, Angela found herself quietly pining for their old lives, where a single bouquet of daisies and an evening stroll could ignite her spirit more than any five-star event. When Angela discovered she was pregnant, she hoped it might rekindle the warmth and closeness they once shared. She dreamed of Mark's strong arms wrapped around her, whispering excited plans for a nursery. Yet from the very first conversation, she sensed his excitement was tainted. Instead of wholeheartedly celebrating her news, he mumbled something about how a baby might complicate ongoing deals. She tried to reassure him that they would navigate parenthood just like any other challenge, united by love and commitment. But the more her belly grew, the more Mark seemed to drift. Business expansions, urgent calls from Hong Kong, clandestine texts that he refused to show her. These all took precedence. Angela, in the softness of her heart, convinced herself that Mark was merely stressed. He was under intense pressure, or so he said. If anything, it was a testament to how dedicated he was to providing a secure life for their future child. She held on to that thought like a lifeline, refusing to consider more troubling possibilities. Meanwhile, Mark privately relished his newfound status among the mega-rich. He had formed partnerships with influential names. One such person was Richard Caldwell, a private equity mogul known for his hush-hush real estate acquisitions from Manhattan to Los Angeles. Caldwell quickly became more than just a business contact. He was also Mark's mentor in the art of living lavishly, constantly reminding him, wealth is not just about what you own. It's about how you display it. Between the constant swirl of business negotiations and late-night private gatherings at Caldwell's penthouse, Mark found himself on a slippery slope of moral compromises. It wasn't just about ignoring Angela. He was now drawn to a lifestyle where excess blurred ethical lines, and where loyalty even to one spouse became just another disposable commodity. In the back of his mind, Mark rationalized everything. He was simply seizing opportunities that his younger self could only dream about. After all, once the dust settled, he'd settle down. He promised himself he would eventually focus on family life. Among the wave of new faces entering Mark's life was Cassie Delgado, a striking woman with flowing auburn hair who exuded confidence and ambition. She first appeared on the scene as a marketing consultant recommended by one of Mark's investors. Their initial meeting took place in a sleek Manhattan boardroom, and Cassie left a powerful impression. She had a knack for reading a room, understanding its power dynamics, and adjusting her tone to sway the conversation in her favor. Mark watched, half amazed and half envious, as she negotiated cutting-edge promotional deals with an ease and flair that rivaled his own. She was more than an adept negotiator. Her presence was magnetic. Cassie was the kind of woman who seemed to invite confessions and temptations, her laughter hinting at secrets waiting to be uncovered. When Mark discovered she came from a modest background much like his, he felt an immediate sense of kinship. She too had clawed her way up from near obscurity. They bonded over shared stories of once living paycheck to paycheck, mocking the condescending attitudes they endured from privileged elites. And yet, while Angela's gentle innocence had once captivated Mark, Cassie's fierceness both inspired and intimidated him. On the surface, they formed a natural professional alliance, two driven personalities with matching hunger for wealth and influence. Beneath that veneer, however, a different chemistry was building. Mutual admiration soon morphed into flirtatious texts, then secret coffee dates under the guise of client meetings. Cassie was shrewd enough to know exactly what she wanted. She was not a naive romantic easily carried away by Mark's charms. She calculated every advantage that could be gained from their liaison. Whenever Mark talked about his personal life, Cassie would gently place a hand on his shoulder, tilt her head with empathy, and convince him that she alone understood his pressures. At first, it was subtle comfort during stressful work situations. But as time wore on, those stolen moments felt like portals to an alternate reality, where Mark wasn't obligated to be the doting husband or expectant father. He was free to indulge in Cassie's wiles, free to forget that Angela existed at home, softly crying herself to sleep. Each clandestine meeting fueled an adrenaline rush, unlike anything Mark had felt before. One evening, Cassie invited him to a high-end fashion show after party, an event teeming with celebrities and socialites. Mark reasoned it was good for networking, so he attended in the dimly lit VIP lounge amid pulsing music and expensive champagne. Mark kissed Cassie for the first time. Angela was thousands of miles away in Buffalo for a prenatal checkup, but even if she had been in the same city, Mark doubted the outcome would have changed. Cassie was intoxicating. For a while, their affair was their best-kept secret. Mark rationalized that no real harm was done. He was merely satisfying a physical and emotional itch. Business thrived, and Mark promised himself that once the baby arrived, he would end it. He pictured a scenario in which he'd gracefully cut ties with Cassie, quietly return to Angela, and no one would ever know. But the more he tried to imagine an exit strategy, the deeper he sank into Cassie's enticements. Before long, Cassie began to sense Mark's warring guilt. She was nobody's fool. She noticed the anxious tone in his voice after each rendezvous and spotted the wedding ring he rarely took off. Yet she never pushed for a more official status. She didn't need to. Her hold over him was strong enough, and she reaped benefits as his preferred consultant, winning her lucrative contracts. Unbeknownst to Mark, Cassie also had connections in other circles. She heard whispers of the IRS investigating not just Mark's businesses, but also Caldwell's. These tidbits floated around black tie galas and hush-hush dinners. She gleaned from passing remarks how Mark's deals sometimes skirted the edges of legality. It was all speculation, but she kept it stored in the back of her mind should she ever need an ace up her sleeve. Angela, meanwhile, was growing more anxious by the day. Mark's excuses for his long absences piled up crucial deals, hectic travel schedules, emergency client meetings at odd hours. At times, Angela tried to voice her concerns, but Mark always brushed them off with dismissive gestures, telling her not to stress herself out during the pregnancy. Each time she felt a nagging sense that something was deeply amiss, but she forced herself to believe Mark's explanations. After all, how could the father of her unborn child be unfaithful? He was the man who once sobbed tears of joy when she agreed to marry him. Yet on nights when the loneliness grew unbearable, Angela couldn't help scrolling through Mark's social media, analyzing every new post or tagged photo like a detective on the verge of an explosive revelation. She couldn't place it exactly, but she sensed that the radiant smile on Mark's face in those pictures wasn't the same one he reserved for her or once had. Something vital had changed. It was as if he had found a new source of excitement, leaving Angela feeling more invisible with each passing day. Angela had no idea that an even bigger betrayal was about to blow their world apart, that her husband's business partner was really a mistress, and neither Mark nor Cassie suspected that the glittering tapestry of their covert romance was about to be torn asunder by forces far beyond their control. After all, if there's one thing life teaches us, it's that no secret can stay hidden forever, and that a reckoning is inevitable when you've built your castle on shifting sand. At home, each day of Angela's pregnancy crawled by like a slow-moving storm cloud. She had hoped that her growing belly would be a beacon of joy for both her and Mark, proof that love could endure beyond the manic hustle of corporate life. Instead, she found herself more alone than ever. Friends suggested prenatal yoga, childbirth classes, or baby shower plans, but Angela found it hard to join in the celebrations. How could she rejoice when Mark seemed only half present? Angela's symptoms, morning sickness, mood swings, and constant fatigue, were magnified by emotional distress. Nights brought panic attacks that left her trembling under the covers, her tears dampening the pillow. Where was the partner who had once held her tight, reminding her that everything would be okay. Where was the man who had promised to love her in sickness and in health? When she tried to reach out, the phone calls went unanswered or were hurriedly cut short. Mark's texts, once affectionate, devolved into bullet points of half-hearted excuses. He reassured her, big project in Hong Kong, investors in town, busy with conference calls, will be home soon. Angela yearned to believe these promises. But as the weeks went on, she could sense the widening gap. She sought solace in memories of happier times, the first months of their marriage, in a small but cozy apartment, the simple act of cooking dinner together, laughing at inside jokes no one else could understand. Now the mansion they called home felt like an empty museum, its gilded ornaments and plush furniture mocking her loneliness. The house staff, housekeeper, chef, and driver tried to care for Angela, but their presence only highlighted Mark's absence. One evening, determined to bring back a shred of normalcy, Angela arranged a special dinner complete with soft candlelight and her favorite homemade lasagna. She spent hours meticulously preparing each ingredient, all in hopes that Mark would come home and remember the love they once shared. She waited, her heart pounding at each passing minute. Midnight came and went, and by 1 a.m, the lasagna was cold and her tears were hot on her cheeks. Mark never walked through the door. Days blurred together in a monotonous cycle of doctor's visits and heartbreak. Angela's obstetrician, Dr. Viola Bancroft, gently advised her to minimize stress, emphasizing how harmful chronic anxiety could be for both mother and baby. Angela tried. She practiced deep breathing exercises, wrote in a journal, and consulted with a pregnancy counselor. In private moments, she'd place her hand on her belly, speaking softly to the life growing within her. She promised her unborn child that no matter what, they would be loved. Even if Mark never returned to them in the way he once was, Angela resolved to be strong. But that resolve wavered whenever Angela spotted something suspicious online. Mark's social media, once a tame collection of business achievements and philanthropic engagements, had transformed into a gallery of exotic beaches, poolside cocktails, and glamorous parties. And he wasn't alone in these photos. A beautiful red-haired woman, sometimes tagged as Cassie Delgado, appeared in the background, or sometimes right by Mark's side. The two looked far too comfortable, far too close. Angela tried to reason with herself that maybe it was innocent, a professional associate or a friend. Yet the intimacy in their smiles felt like a dagger in Angela's heart. She dared not question Mark about it directly. She feared the answers she might get, or worse, the way he might dismiss her concerns altogether. Still, the seed of suspicion grew fueled by late-night social media stalking and the silent agony of her intuition. Each time Angela tried to bring up Cassie's name, Mark would brush it off, repeating lines like, "She's a valuable consultant," or "We're finalizing a huge deal, stop worrying." Angela's internal turmoil escalated until one night she broke down completely. She found herself curled up on the floor of the master bedroom, phone clutched in her shaking hand, sobbing uncontrollably. The images of Mark's apparent happiness with this other woman tormented her. Her growing stomach only served as a painful reminder that while her body prepared for motherhood, Mark seemed to be living a carefree, childless existence. Amid her tears, Angela realized something she was witnessing. Mark's transformation into the kind of man he once despised, someone who put material success and fleeting pleasures above everything else, including loyalty and love. The questions piled up. Could she trust him anymore? Would he even want to be part of the baby's life? And what if these business trips were mere covers for wild vacations with Cassie? Quietly, Angela decided that if Mark refused to come home to her, she would seek the truth on her own terms. She began to imagine confronting him directly, to see his reaction, to see if he'd lie to her face. For Angela, the days of silent suffering might soon come to an end. But before she could fully plan her confrontation, fate began its own countdown. Forces were converging behind the scenes, angry investors, suspicious auditors, and the unstoppable momentum of gossip that swirled through the social circles Mark desperately tried to impress. Unaware of the storm that lay ahead, Angela continued to cling to one fragile hope that Mark would redeem himself before it was too late. Beachfront villas, crystal blue waters, and indulgent spa treatments at world-class resorts. This was Mark's new normal whenever he traveled with Cassie. The pair found endless excuses to combine work trips with scenic getaways, posting tastefully curated snapshots on social media. In each photo, Mark radiated a carefree smile, as if the sum of his worries amounted to nothing more significant than choosing the next cocktail to sip. Cassie orchestrated every shot, understanding the power of optics. She took great care to capture Mark against a backdrop of towering palm trees, their fronds swaying above him like a king's canopy. In some photos, Cassie stood at the edge of the frame, an enigmatic figure sipping champagne. The images ignited social media buzz and gossip in their swanky circles. Who is that stunning redhead with Mark Rutherford? Is she his new business partner or something more? The speculation only added to the thrilling aura of their forbidden escapade. For Mark, the vacation pics served a dual purpose. First, they fed his ego. After years of hustling to get recognized by society's upper echelons, he relished every like, comment, and message praising his amazing life. Second, they were a form of self-deception. If he convinced the world he was happy, maybe he could stifle the nagging guilt in his conscience. Guilt about leaving Angela alone at home, pregnant and distraught. Of course, Mark conveniently never mentioned Angela in these posts, nor did he reveal the existence of an unborn child. He rationalized that it was a private matter, not suited for public consumption. When friends and acquaintances inquired about Angela, he'd respond with vague statements. "Oh, she's busy preparing for the baby," or "traveling isn't safe for her right now." He avoided deeper questions at all costs. The last thing he wanted was an unscripted interview on how his personal life was unraveling. Cassie, meanwhile, reveled in her rising social profile. She found herself tagged in photos by influencers and minor celebrities who recognized Mark's wealth and Cassie's clever marketing strategies. Doors to exclusive events opened, wider brunch invitations from industry heavyweights rolled in. Through all this, Cassie remained calculated. She encouraged Mark to spend more lavishly to cultivate a public image as a worldly magnate on the verge of major global deals. That meant private jets instead of first-class commercial flights, dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, and suites in the most luxurious hotels. Mark complied, though each charge made his accountants and financial managers increasingly anxious. None of this extravagance occurred without cost. Mark's fluid capital was tied up in high-risk ventures. Liquidity was tighter than appearances suggested. He juggled lines of credit and questionable transactions, leaning heavily on Caldwell's counsel. Caldwell, too, urged Mark to keep the momentum of success going. "Fake it till you make it" was essentially their unspoken mantra. As long as public perception remained, stellar deals would keep flowing, and the heavy interest rates and balloon payments could be pushed further into the future. But cracks in the glossy surface began to form. On a particular getaway in Fiji, Mark received a barrage of frantic texts from his CFO. Financial regulators were poking around. Some suspicious wire transfers were flagged. Panicked investors were demanding clarifications on how Mark's so-called expansions aligned with his sudden personal spending, Mark tried to brush it off, determined not to let anything ruin his beach holiday with Cassie. He reasoned that this was just a minor hiccup. Nothing a few well-placed phone calls and quick financial maneuvers couldn't fix. Cassie, ever attuned to the slightest shift in Mark's mood, pressed him for details. He only offered vague reassurances about routine audits and overzealous inspectors. This was the first time she witnessed a real worry flicker behind Mark's confident facade. Sensing the potential threat to her cushy arrangement, Cassie tried to downplay it, coaxing him back into the carefree zone. They snapped more radiant selfies on the shore, hoping to drown out reality with digital illusions. Unbeknownst to them, Angela was scrolling through these very pictures. At that moment, tears streaming down her cheeks as she recognized the hotel's name from a travel magazine. The woman in Mark's arms wasn't just a business partner. No professional consultant gazed at a client with such intimate adoration. Angela felt a sharp ache in her chest as she realized how little Mark cared about hiding his betrayal. The audacity of his posts was almost surreal. Desperation clawed at Angela's insides. Perhaps confronting him through a phone call where she could hear his voice break if he lied was her best shot at forcing the truth. Gathering her nerve, she dialed Mark's number. No answer. She tried again and again, only to be met with voicemail. Anger flared up in her, a rage she'd never felt before. This was no longer a series of unfortunate misunderstandings or too busy at work moments. This was blatant humiliation. In the background, the swirl of an IRS investigation was growing stronger. Anonymous tips and suspicious transaction reports had caught the attention of forensic accountants who were beginning to follow the money trail. The timing of Mark's lavish travels raised red flags. Why, they wondered, would a businessman under such financial scrutiny broadcast opulent holidays across social media? Didn't he realize that auditors often examine lifestyle displays as part of their case? For Mark, ignorance felt like bliss. The more pictures he posted, the less real his looming problems seemed. Yet reality was closing in fast. The golden sand and azure waves might have served as a temporary stage for his fabricated paradise, but the tides were about to shift. And when they did, they'd wash away more than just footprints in the sand. While Mark and Cassie soaked in, the Fiji Sun agents at the Internal Revenue Service's Manhattan branch started piecing together fragments of an intricate puzzle. Spearheading the investigation was a meticulous auditor named Mallory Finch, reputed for her tenacity and keen ability to spot inconsistencies in vast financial records. Mallory had received a discreet tip about Mark Rutherford's questionable income streams, and once she opened his file, she discovered an alarming mismatch between his reported earnings and the lifestyle he flaunted. Mallory was never one to jump to conclusions, but the more she dug, the more anomalies she found. A sudden influx of capital, suspiciously timed with Mark's social media updates of private jet getaways, a pattern of shell companies popping up in multiple states, then vanishing without clear financial statements, offshore accounts vaguely tied to Mark's business, some of which contained substantial deposits from individuals flagged for previous tax evasion. These pieces raised her eyebrows, and Mallory suspected this investigation could balloon into something far larger than a mere tax discrepancy. Her next step involved contacting individuals who might share insights on Mark's dealings. One name that kept surfacing was Richard Caldwell, the private equity mogul rumored to have a hand in Mark's expansions. Caldwell himself was already under IRS scrutiny for unrelated properties in Florida and the Carolinas. If Caldwell and Mark were pooling resources in some illicit scheme, it could spell big headlines. Mallory prepared requests for bank statements, wire transfers, credit card expenditures, anything that would illustrate the true scope of Mark's financial empire. At the same time, Mark's CFO, Brian Cummings, was drowning in chaos. As soon as he noticed the heightened interest from regulatory authorities, Brian tried to warn Mark. But each call went unanswered, each email unreturned. Panic thrummed in Brian's chest. The entire finance department was on edge, especially after receiving official requests from the IRS for detailed financial records. Paper trails that Mark had insisted be handled discreetly were now fair game. If Mark didn't address these issues promptly, the meltdown would be inevitable. Behind the scenes, Caldwell played it cool. In public, he would toast Mark as a brilliant entrepreneur and encourage him to keep up appearances. In private, Caldwell had already started distancing himself, transferring assets, and instructing his own legal team to prepare for inquiries. If the walls caved in, Caldwell intended to emerge with minimal damage, leaving Mark to shoulder the brunt of the consequences. Word of the looming audit spread quietly through Manhattan's financial circles. Bankers and lawyers connected to Mark had hushed luncheons, speculating about the magnitude of his troubles. Some predicted he'd face a heavy fine at best, or a full-scale criminal investigation. At worst, a few even took delight in the prospect of Mark's downfall, viewing it as an inevitable collapse for a man who rose too fast, spent too freely, and believed himself untouchable. Meanwhile, Angela was oblivious to the complexities of Mark's finances. Her world was confined to heartbreak and concern over her unborn child. She knew Mark must be in trouble. The abrupt changes in his behavior, the money he threw around so casually, the hush-hush deals he once mentioned but refused to elaborate upon. Yet she couldn't fathom the depth of the scandal brewing. Each day her anxiety deepened, a feeling that something catastrophic was hovering just out of sight. It all came to a head when Angela received a strange phone call from one of Mark's junior associates, a woman named Kara Hoffman. Although Kara didn't divulge specifics, she sounded panicked. "Angela, I don't know if you're aware, but there are investigations going on. Things look bad." Angela's heart pounded in her ears as Kara's words spilled over the line. "We're being asked for documents, receipts. I think Mark's in serious trouble. And look, this might not be my place, but I think you should know Mark's not who he used to be." Angela thanked Kara, her mind spiraling with questions. What exactly were they investigating? Had Mark committed fraud? Was he actually bankrupt and hiding the truth? The uncertainties gnawed at her. She ended the call feeling more determined than ever to confront Mark. She realized that her heartbreak over his possible affair was only one part of a bigger, uglier picture. If he was entangled in financial crimes, her unborn child's future would be at stake too. In Fiji, Mark was irritated to see a slew of missed calls from Brian and a cryptic text from Caldwell. "We need to talk ASAP." He tried to keep his calm exterior, but Cassie noticed the worry lines etched across his brow. Over an expensive bottle of wine at a cliffside restaurant, Mark finally admitted to her that the IRS might be launching a routine audit, but insisted it was nothing major. Cassie, who had heard different rumors from her insider network, suspected it was more serious than Mark let on. Yet she feigned reassurance, drawing Mark into a languid embrace. They'd handle it together, she cooed. They were unstoppable when united. That night, however, Cassie stepped outside onto the moonlit beach and placed a phone call to one of her closest confidants, an attorney who specialized in corporate law. Just in case she wanted to know her rights and potential liabilities, if Mark went down, Cassie had no intention of going down with him. Far away from that tranquil beach, Mallory Finch and her team worked late hours, scanning through reams of documents. Something big was surfacing, a web of shell companies, unaccounted funds, and potential tax evasion, so blatant it nearly dared the authorities to react. As she compiled her findings, Mallory sensed a storm about to erupt. The wealthy always believed they could outrun the law, but in her experience, hubris was their undoing. She gave a final glance at Mark's social media feed, scoffing at the gall of a man who flaunted paradise while standing at the brink of a scandal. Angela stood at the top of the grand staircase, the late afternoon sun illuminating her pregnant silhouette as she awaited Mark's return. She had summoned every last shred of courage to do what she should have done weeks ago, demand answers face to face. The house staff, sensing the tension, made themselves scarce. Rarely did Angela request the entire household's presence be minimal, but now she needed privacy. She needed space to unleash her anguish without an audience. Finally, Mark entered, dragging a suitcase behind him. He looked exhausted, yet still wore that forced confidence he had perfected in boardrooms. Angela's throat constricted at the sight of him. This was the man she'd once adored, now nearly a stranger. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed anger and hurt. Mark's immediate instinct was to deflect Angela. "I've just come off a long flight. Can we do this later?" He began massaging his temples dramatically, but Angela stood firm, crossing her arms protectively over her belly. "No, now." A tense silence fell between them in the marble-floored foyer. Angela had rehearsed this confrontation dozens of times in her head, but the actual moment felt surreal. She started with the obvious, his social media posts. She demanded to know who the woman was, whether Cassie Delgado was truly just a consultant. Mark tried to dismiss it as exaggerated rumors describing Cassie as a business partner who happened to be a close friend. Yet Angela's tears and fury dissolved any illusions. She raged at him for abandoning her during the pregnancy, for flaunting a lavish lifestyle, while she dealt with swollen ankles, hormonal surges, and sleepless nights alone. Her voice rose with each accusation. She brandished printouts of Mark's social media pictures, her hands shaking violently. "You think I'm stupid? Look at how she stares at you in these pictures." Her tears glimmered in the light, but her voice stayed sharp, revealing a hidden steeliness that Mark was unprepared for. Cornered Mark tried to justify himself. He mumbled about stressful deals and complicated emotions, as though that gave him a license to betray her. Sometimes, I feel trapped. Our life, it got so big, so fast. I never wanted to hurt you." But Angela's eyes, filled with betrayal, told him that any excuse would be hollow. Then came the topic Mark dreaded most: the IRS investigation. Angela slammed a folder onto a nearby coffee table containing the messages and notices she had intercepted from Mark's CFO and legal team. "I'm not a fool, Mark. What's going on with our finances? Are we in danger?" Her voice cracked, revealing not just anger, but a profound fear for the baby's future. Mark went pale. Faced with no way out, Mark finally admitted pieces of the truth: that the IRS was scrutinizing his accounts and that Caldwell was under investigation. He glossed over the details, claiming it was merely a routine check, but Angela knew better. She told him about the phone call from Cara Hoffman, the anxiety in the finance department, the hush-hush rumors swirling in business circles. Mark's casual dismissal of the audit set her on edge. She could see the worry etched in his eyes, belying his false assurances. In that painful moment, Angela realized they were standing on the precipice of something far larger than infidelity. They were at risk of losing their home, their reputations, possibly even their freedom if Mark's dealings were truly illegal. A swirl of confusion overtook her. How could the man she loved, who once saved every penny to buy her a modest engagement ring, have drifted so far into moral bankruptcy, summoning what strength she had. Left, Angela delivered an ultimatum. Either you end this affair, cooperate fully with the investigation, and prove you can be a father, or I'll leave. I won't stand by and let you drag me and our child down with you. Her tone was firm, a quiet declaration that shattered Mark's self-serving illusions. For the first time, he saw in Angela a strength more formidable than he had ever imagined. He stuttered, pleading with her to let him make it. Right, insisting that Cassie meant nothing, that he'd handle the IRS. But Angela stared at him, tears still streaming. She gave him one last chance, an opportunity to come clean and choose family over his addictive chase for wealth and excitement. Mark stood there, drenched in shame and uncertainty, uncertain if he could muster the courage to confront the monstrous problems he himself had created. The moment Mark set foot in his corner office. The next day, he felt the tension in the air so thick it could be cut with a knife. Several of his junior associates were huddled in the hallway, whispering among themselves. His CFO, Brian Cummings, appeared frazzled eyes, lined with dark circles from working through the night. A handful of boxes, filled with financial documents, stood stacked against the walls, evidence that the office had been combed through thoroughly. No sooner had Mark taken a seat behind his expansive mahogany desk than Mallory Finch, the lead auditor from the IRS, entered the room. She introduced herself politely, but her demeanor carried the authority of someone who had already unearthed serious irregularities. Mark tried to maintain his usual cool composure, but Mallory's questions were pointed. We'll need full access to your ledgers, bank statements, and any documentation related to your offshore accounts, she stated, her voice calm yet unyielding. One by one, Mark's staff delivered files to Mallory and her audit team. The entire office felt like a crime scene, with accountants and lawyers picking through every line item, every receipt and every contract. Mark attempted to project an air of cooperation, hoping that by acting transparent, he might reduce suspicion. Yet behind the facade, panic flared in his chest with each document he signed over. Over the following days, Mallory's team uncovered evidence of large sums of money flowing through shell corporations. Whenever Mark tried to feign ignorance, Mallory presented him with email correspondences or suspicious wire transfer confirmations bearing his digital signature. In meeting after meeting, Mark struggled to explain the labyrinthine structure of his business dealings. He found himself stumbling over the complexities, some of which Caldwell had orchestrated. Meanwhile, Caldwell was conspicuously absent. Phone calls to him went straight to voicemail, and cryptic text messages offered no real support. Mark finally reached Caldwell's lawyer, only to be informed that Caldwell was unavailable and that Mark should speak to his own legal counsel. Though Mark's official stance remained that he and Caldwell were partners, Caldwell had begun insulating himself from the fallout. Cassie, too, seemed suddenly distant. She had been helpful before, but once the audit gained momentum, she avoided dropping by the office or appearing with Mark publicly. She insisted it was best to keep a low profile until the situation blew over. Privately, Cassie was assessing whether Mark was worth sticking around for, or if she should jump ship to protect her burgeoning career. The glow of their sun-drenched vacations felt like a lifetime ago. Now every conversation crackled with tension. Amid the chaos, Angela received a flurry of calls from Mark's lawyers, advising her to limit any public statements or social media posts that might affect the ongoing investigation. Though she had no intention of speaking publicly, she understood the subtext. They feared she might vent her frustrations, potentially exposing more of Mark's secrets. She responded politely, but remained on guard, reluctant to trust anyone paid by Mark's questionable fortunes. But for Angela, the real challenge was emotional. She felt paralyzed, uncertain whether to believe Mark's repeated assertions that he was handling it. With each day, her baby grew inside her, a silent testament to the gravity of the life choices swirling around her. She was torn between anger, heartbreak, and the faint hope that Mark could somehow rectify the damage he'd wrought. As the audit wore on, Mark's worst fears materialized. His personal finances, those he had guarded most fiercely, were now under scrutiny. Mallory's team discovered that some of his lavish personal expenses were siphoned directly from corporate accounts. Worse, there was evidence of tax fraud, with Mark claiming deductions for luxury trips that in reality had nothing to do with legitimate business. It was the perfect storm for a case that could escalate beyond simple fines into criminal charges. In a tense meeting late one evening, Mark's legal counsel laid everything on the table. If you don't fully cooperate and provide any remaining documents, the IRS may pursue charges. You could face prison time, Mark reeled. Jail had never been part of his wildest calculations. He had assumed that being wealthy and well-connected would insulate him from serious legal consequences. Now that protective veil was disintegrating, needing a lifeline. Mark attempted to reach out to Caldwell one last time. To his shock, Caldwell's phone was answered by a cold, automated voice announcing the number had been disconnected. A follow-up call to Caldwell's office revealed that the mogul was allegedly overseas for an extended period. Mark cursed under his breath, realizing he had been left to fend for himself in a lion's den. The man who had once toasted to their partnership was now vanishing like smoke. That night, Mark sat alone in his office, the city lights glimmering through floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the scattered paperwork that spelled doom for his financial empire. He considered calling Cassie to vent or beg for comfort, but the prospect of another hollow reassurance made his stomach churn. As he stared at the final remnants of his once grandiose aspirations, a pang of regret rattled him. He had traded his wife's love and his family's future for fleeting thrills and illusions of grandeur. Now the audit threatened to expose every lie he'd told to Angela, to the world, and most damningly to himself. In the days that followed, the audit expanded, touching not only Mark's direct holdings, but also affiliated partnerships. News leaked, leading to sensational headlines. Millionaire entrepreneur under IRS probe, high-flying lifestyle meets harsh reality, and partner of Richard Caldwell, questioned in major tax evasion case. Journalists began digging into Mark's background, painting him as the poster child for new money gone awry. Every flashy social media post he'd made with Cassie became tabloid fodder. The images relabeled as evidence of possible embezzlement. His office phone rang incessantly with calls from investors, business associates, and even distant relatives who wanted their slice of the truth or an explanation of how he'd tarnished the family name. Mark's PR team scrambled to contain the fallout, spinning statements about how he was fully cooperating with authorities. But the tone was grim, and the public consensus leaned toward condemnation. People love a success story, but they find an equal or perhaps greater thrill in watching a figure stumble, especially one who had reveled in ostentatious displays of wealth. Cassie Delgado, once an ever-present source of excitement, showed up unannounced at Mark's office one evening. Her eyes darted nervously around the reception area, where agents and lawyers were busily poring over boxes of files. She slipped into Mark's private suite, shutting the door behind her with a soft click. Mark, physically and emotionally drained, looked up surprised and guarded. She spoke in a hushed tone, a tremor in her voice, betraying the panic beneath her practiced composure. "Mark, this is getting out of hand. The IRS could start looking into every transaction I handled for you. My name is on some of those marketing contracts. If they think I'm part of this..." She left the threat unspoken. Mark stared at her, half annoyed, half sympathetic. He realized she had never planned to be caught in a legal quagmire. Her loyalty was as transactional as any of his offshore ventures. In a bid to reassure her, Mark promised that her name would remain clear, insisting she hadn't knowingly committed any crimes. She demanded to see documents, emails, receipts, anything to confirm she wouldn't be implicated. Reluctantly, Mark allowed her a glimpse into some sanitized versions of his accounts. Yet the tension between them was palpable. The illusions of a carefree relationship disintegrated under the weight of potential indictments. Cassie left the office with no promise of a future rendezvous. Meanwhile, Angela found herself navigating a different battleground. Mark's lawyers pressed her to sign documents that would shield certain assets under her name, presumably to separate them from Mark's precarious financial entanglements. Confused and wary, Angela enlisted a lawyer of her own. She wasn't about to let Mark's shady dealings ruin her credit or her standing, especially with a baby on the way. "Protect yourself," her lawyer advised. "You don't want to be tied to anything that could be seized if this goes south." At night, Angela wrestled with a storm of emotions. She was furious with Mark for placing her in such a precarious position, but also worried about the father of her child potentially facing prison. Her moral dilemma festered. Should she stand by him in hopes that he'd transform back into the man she once loved? Or should she cut ties, safeguarding herself and her baby from the inevitable destruction amid this maelstrom? Mark's friend-turned-mentor, Richard Caldwell, maintained an enigmatic distance. Whispers circulated that Caldwell had fled to a non-extradition country or was in the process of shifting assets to offshore havens. A single short letter from Caldwell's legal team arrived at Mark's office, disclaiming any responsibility for Mark's financial decisions. It stated, Caldwell was prepared to cooperate with authorities if he was subpoenaed. Mark felt a chill at the underlying threat Caldwell might cut a deal that implicated him in exchange for leniency. In desperation, Mark tried to salvage at least one partnership. He invited one of his key investors, Michael Evans, a man he once considered a friend, to dinner at an upscale restaurant. The objective was to reassure Evans that the business still had potential, that Mark's personal troubles wouldn't sink their joint ventures. But over the flicker of candlelight, Evans drummed his fingers on the table and coldly remarked, "I invested in your vision. Mark, not in your vanity. Now it seems all you cared about was flaunting money you didn't even have." The meal ended early with Evans walking away, refusing to share even a parting handshake. Humiliation sank heavily into Mark's gut doors that once opened for him. Private clubs, elite investment groups were swiftly closing. Rumors and half-truths spread. People who had lauded him for his risk-taking brilliance now labeled him reckless or even criminally negligent. Each day felt like a war of attrition on his spirit, culminating in the knowledge that he had orchestrated his own downfall. In a final desperate effort, Mark turned to Angela, swallowing his pride. He arrived at the mansion late one evening, drenched by a sudden rainstorm, and found her in the living room, reading pregnancy guides by the flickering fire. Collapsing to his knees beside her, Mark pleaded for her forgiveness, promising to set everything right. He vowed to cut ties with Cassie and even threatened legal action against Caldwell, swearing he would devote himself to her and their unborn child if she would just stand by him through the audit. Angela listened with weary eyes. She wanted to believe him, yearned for the possibility of redemption. But trust is not an infinite resource. However profound her love might have been, it was battered and fragile now. "Mark," she whispered, voice trembling, "I need more than promises. I need a reason to believe you'll truly change for once." Mark had no clever comeback, no glib assurance. He simply held Angela's hands in his own, the silent tears mixing with the rainwater dripping from his hair. Yet in her mind, Angela couldn't shake the image of him, carefree on some exotic beach, while her tears stained the floors of an empty home. Whether he was truly remorseful or just desperate to avoid utter collapse, she couldn't quite discern. The inevitable moment came one crisp autumn morning. Mark received a summons detailing the IRS's intent to pursue charges of tax fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to evade taxes. Although formal indictments had not yet been filed, the document spelled out enough to shake Mark to his core. If convicted, he could face hefty fines and potentially years behind bars. News outlets pounced on the story, fueling public outrage over Mark's ostentatious lifestyle at the expense of unpaid taxes and possible illegal gains. Overnight, he became a pariah. The viral hashtag #RutherfordCoreReckoning trended across social media, accompanied by pictures from his once vaunted Instagram feed. Memes ridiculed him as a cautionary tale of greed and moral decay. As the IRS case progressed, Mark's lawyers advised him to seek a plea deal, something that might reduce jail time if he cooperated fully and revealed any co-conspirators. Mark balked at first. The mere idea of turning on Caldwell felt like a betrayal. But Caldwell had already disappeared from Mark's life, leaving a trail of plausible deniability. There was no loyalty to preserve anymore. In a tense meeting with his legal team, Mark agreed to provide detailed accounts of his transactions with Caldwell and the shady practices they had employed to mask income. It was a desperate act, akin to dragging others into the fire to lessen his own burns. Mark felt equal parts anger and shame. His once proud confidence had eroded, leaving behind a man grasping for any lifeline. Meanwhile, Angela watched from the sidelines, sickened and heartbroken. She was summoned as well, though primarily as a witness. Her name was on certain joint bank accounts. Her baby bump had grown. Each kick reminded her of the new life she was trying to protect. She prepared herself to testify, truthfully determined not to lie for Mark. If he had ever truly loved her, he wouldn't force her into the role of accomplice. Cassie Delgado, too, was called for questioning. While her official work for Mark's firm was deemed legitimate, investigators wanted to ensure she wasn't complicit in any financial crimes. Terrified of criminal charges, Cassie painted herself as merely an employee, someone who had no role in Mark's financial decisions. She cooperated, answering every question about Mark's whereabouts, his corporate spending, and how business expenses often appeared suspiciously personal in nature. With her personal involvement clarified, Cassie walked away unscathed, albeit her reputation irreparably tarnished. The final blow to Mark's empire came with a court-ordered freeze on many of his assets. His mansion went into foreclosure, luxury cars were repossessed, and his bank accounts were seized, pending further legal proceedings. One by one, employees in his companies were laid off, fueling bitter resentment from families who relied on those paychecks. Mark couldn't meet payroll or vendor obligations. He watched helplessly as everything he'd built, the offices, the brand, the illusions, crumbled. Angela made the difficult decision to move out of the mansion before the bank officially reclaimed it. She refused Mark's tearful requests to stay by his side, insisting they needed space to reflect. She settled temporarily in a modest apartment near her parents, choosing to focus on her well-being and the baby's imminent arrival. Her lawyer had successfully shielded her personal finances, ensuring she wouldn't be dragged into Mark's legal vortex. On the day Mark finally accepted the plea agreement, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, cameras flashed. As he walked in, his hair unkempt, dark circles under his eyes. The same man who once strutted in designer suits now wore a resigned expression and an off-the-rack outfit. In front of a judge, he spoke words he never envisioned uttering. "I plead guilty, Your Honor." The plea involved cooperating with ongoing investigations into Caldwell's network, offering testimony regarding their underhanded financial schemes. Though prison time was nearly certain, it might be lessened due to his cooperation. Standing in that courtroom, Mark felt a nauseating swirl of regret. He flashed back to simpler times, when a faithful wife, a small apartment, and a dream for a better life had been enough. How far he had strayed. Walking out to a chorus of shouted questions from journalists, Mark said nothing. His lawyer shielded him, guiding him into a waiting car. As they pulled away, he glimpsed a billboard on a nearby building. It displayed a gleaming tropical scene, with a couple laughing on a beach, a seductive advertisement for holiday packages. He closed his eyes, remembering his social media posts with Cassie under exactly such a sun. The irony was as bitter as the metallic taste of fear and regret on his tongue. In the ensuing weeks, Mark prepared for sentencing. The judge would weigh his cooperation against the severity of his crimes. He resided in a small, barren apartment, a far cry from his former luxury. The silence at night was deafening, and sleep evaded him. He alternated between making calls to his remaining legal counsel and drafting letters of apology to employees, to business partners, and most painfully to Angela. While Mark grappled with his new reality, Angela focused on hers. She continued prenatal checkups, often accompanied by her supportive mother. Away from the oppressive gloom of Mark's downfall, Angela found moments of calm, even happiness. She set up a simple nursery in her parents' home, painting the walls a gentle shade of yellow. As she folded tiny baby clothes, she felt a blend of apprehension and resolve. The future was uncertain, but she would not let Mark's mistakes define her child's life. As Mark approached his sentencing date, he met again with Mallory Finch, the steadfast IRS auditor who had spearheaded the case. Despite her unwavering professionalism, Mallory sensed the tragic undertones of Mark's journey. She had encountered dozens of wealthy individuals who believed themselves untouchable, but Mark's downfall seemed particularly steep. When Mark thanked her, an odd moment of gratitude to the person who had effectively unraveled his life, Mallory simply responded, "I hope this leads you to a better path." On a chilly winter afternoon, Angela went into labor, surrounded by her mother, her sister, and a compassionate medical staff. She brought a healthy baby boy into the world. She named him Daniel, honoring her grandfather. As she held her son for the first time, tears rolled down her cheeks. This was a new beginning, fragile, beautiful, and untainted by the sins of the father. Mark, informed by letter, received the news in his prison cell. He felt a pang of both joy and sorrow, imagining the life he could have shared with them, if only he hadn't succumbed to greed and self-indulgence. Restricted by concrete walls and razor wire, he could only dream of a day he might hold his child. He resolved that if he ever got the chance, he would be a better man. This real-life drama story of grandiose wealth, crushing betrayal, and hard-earned redemption reminds us that no amount of luxury can outweigh the value of loyalty and honesty. Mark Rutherford's rise and fall echo a stark warning beneath every glittering facade. Lie choices that can shatter families and futures. If we allow greed to eclipse our moral compass, Angela's journey underlines the power of inner strength. By choosing integrity over complicity, she protected not just herself, but the next generation. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this gripping saga. If you found value or inspiration in Angela's resilience and learned from Mark's tragic lessons, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others who need a wake-up call, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we continue to explore life's most dramatic stories reminding ourselves of the profound consequences of our actions and the resilience of the human spirit.